An engine so good that it became problematic? The Detroit 8V92 wasn't just loud and fast, it was unstoppable. So why did it disappear from the roads? Was it too powerful for its own good? Let's find out. The Detroit 8V92 wasn't born in a boardroom or sketched on a napkin during lunch. It emerged from the brutal reality of marine warfare and the unforgiving demands of the open ocean. Detroit Diesel had been perfecting their two-stroke engine technology since the 1930s, but it was their work with the U.S. Navy during World War II that really perfected their craft. By the 1960s, Detroit Series 92 engines were already making waves in the marine industry. These weren't your typical truck engines, they were massive, powerful, and designed to run continuously for months at a time. The inline-six V92 had already proven itself in buses and some heavy-duty applications, but Detroit's engineers knew they could push the envelope further. The magic happened when they decided to add 2 more cylinders to create the 8V92. This wasn't just about scaling up, it was about creating a completely new category of power. The 8V92 displaced 736 cubic inches, making it one of the largest engines ever offered in a highway truck. Each cylinder produced about 53 horsepower, and with 8 of them, the engine roared with enough power to turn heads. But here's where the story gets interesting. Detroit Diesel didn't just create a bigger engine, they created a more efficient one. The two-stroke design meant that every cylinder fired on every revolution, unlike 4-stroke engines that fired every other revolution. This gave the 8V92 twice the power strokes of a comparable 4-stroke engine, resulting in incredible torque output that made pulling 80,000-pound loads feel effortless. The engine featured wet cylinder liners, which could be replaced without removing the engine from the truck, a revolutionary concept that would save fleet operators thousands of dollars in maintenance costs. The Detroit's distinctive sound came from its roots blower, a massive supercharger that forced air through the cylinders to aid in both combustion and cooling. When the 8V92 hit the market in the early 1970s, it was like bringing a rocket launcher to a knife fight. While competitors were struggling to break the 300 horsepower barrier, Detroit was offering an engine that could easily produce 425 horsepower and over 1,400 pound-feet of torque. The trucking industry had never seen anything like it. Owner-operators fell in love with the 8V92 immediately. Here was an engine that could maintain highway speeds while pulling maximum loads up steep grades. The distinctive rumble of the Detroit two-stroke became the soundtrack of American trucking. Drivers would recognize the sound of an 8V92 from miles away, and that sound meant power, reliability, and the freedom to haul anything anywhere. The engine's popularity exploded during the trucking boom of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Deregulation had opened up the industry to independent operators, and these entrepreneurs needed equipment that could work as hard as they did. The 8V92 delivered in spades. It was virtually indestructible, could run for 1,000,000 miles with proper maintenance, and had enough power to handle any load the Department of Transportation would allow. Fleet operators loved the 8V92 for different reasons. The engine's modular design meant that repairs could be done quickly and cost-effectively. The wet liners could be replaced roadside if necessary, and the engine's robust construction meant fewer breakdowns and more uptime. In an industry where time is money, the 8V92 was printing cash. Detroit Diesel's market share soared. By the early 1980s, they controlled over 40% of the heavy-duty truck engine market, and the 8V92 was their flagship product. Trucking magazines featured the engine on their covers, and truck stops across America echoed with the distinctive sound of Detroit iron. But wait, if the 8V92 was so successful, so beloved, and so dominant, why isn't it still the king of the highway today? What could possibly have gone wrong with an engine that seemed to have everything going for it? Well, the answer lies in a perfect storm of changing regulations, evolving technology, and the very power that made it great. The 8V92's dominance began to show its first vulnerabilities in the mid-1980s, and ironically, it was the engine's greatest strength that became its greatest weakness. The massive power output that made the 8V92 so desirable also made it incredibly thirsty for fuel. While competitors were achieving 6 to 7 miles per gallon, trucks equipped with 8V92s were lucky to see 4 to 5 miles per gallon under similar conditions. When diesel fuel was cheap and plentiful, this wasn't a major concern, but as fuel prices began to rise and environmental consciousness grew, fleet operators started doing the math. The 8V92 might have been powerful, but it was also expensive to operate. The two-stroke design that gave the 8V92 its power advantage also created some inherent disadvantages. The engine consumed more oil than four-stroke competitors, required more frequent maintenance, and produced higher emissions. These issues were manageable when the engine was competing primarily on power and reliability, but the landscape was changing. Computer technology was beginning to revolutionize engine design. Electronic fuel injection, turbocharging improvements, and sophisticated engine management systems were allowing four-stroke engines to achieve power levels that had previously been the exclusive domain of the Detroit two-stroke. Suddenly, competitors could offer engines that produced comparable power with better fuel economy and lower emissions. The trucking industry itself was evolving. The Wild West days of deregulation were giving way to a more mature, cost-conscious market. Fleet operators were becoming more sophisticated in their analysis of total cost of ownership, and the 8V92's higher operating costs were becoming harder to justify. Detroit Diesel tried to address these concerns with various improvements to the 8V92. They introduced electronic controls, improved fuel injection systems, and even experimented with different turbocharging configurations. But these modifications couldn't overcome the fundamental physics of the two-stroke design. The engine was trapped by its own architecture. If fuel economy concerns were the first warning signs, emissions regulations were the approaching hurricane that would ultimately sink the 8V92. The Environmental Protection Agency had been largely focused on automotive emissions throughout the 1970s. But by the 1980s, heavy-duty trucks were squarely in their crosshairs. The 8V92's two-stroke design was inherently dirty. The scavenging process that gave the engine its power advantage also resulted in some unburned fuel being expelled with the exhaust. The oil consumption characteristics of the two-stroke design added to the emissions problem. What had been acceptable in the 1970s was becoming problematic in the 1980s and would be completely unacceptable in the 1990s. The first EPA heavy-duty emission standards took effect in 1988, and they were just the beginning. Detroit Diesel knew that more stringent regulations were coming, and they could see the writing on the wall. The 8V92 in its current form would not be able to meet future emissions requirements without major modifications that would compromise its core advantages. The company faced a critical decision. They could invest heavily in trying to make the two-stroke design compliant with future regulations, or they could pivot to four-stroke technology that would be more adaptable to the new regulatory environment. The choice would define the future of the company. Meanwhile, competitors were already preparing for the new regulatory reality. Cummins, Caterpillar, and other manufacturers were developing four-stroke engines with advanced emissions control systems. These engines might not have matched the raw power of the 8V92, but they offered a cleaner, more fuel-efficient alternative that could meet both current and anticipated future regulations. The trucking industry was also changing its priorities. Environmental consciousness was growing, and companies were beginning to consider their environmental impact as part of their corporate image. The 8V92's reputation as a fuel-guzzling, smoke-belching beast was becoming a liability rather than an asset. By the early 1990s, the 8V92 was fighting a losing battle on multiple fronts. Fuel economy requirements were getting stricter, emissions regulations were becoming more stringent, and customer preferences were shifting toward more efficient engines. Detroit Diesel made several attempts to modernize the 8V92, but each modification seemed to compromise the engine's core strengths. The introduction of electronic controls helped with fuel economy and emissions, but it also added complexity and cost. The 8V92 had always been praised for its simplicity and reliability, but the new electronic systems made it more complicated to maintain and repair. The engine was losing its identity in an attempt to stay relevant. Fleet operators who had been loyal to Detroit Diesel for decades began to look elsewhere. The math was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. A truck equipped with a modern four-stroke engine might cost more upfront, but it would save thousands of dollars per year in fuel costs and maintenance. The 8V92's legendary durability was no longer enough to overcome its operational disadvantages. The final blow came with the EPA's 1994 emissions standards. These regulations were so strict that the 8V92 would have required extensive modifications to comply. Detroit Diesel would have needed to completely redesign the engine's combustion system, add sophisticated after-treatment systems, and potentially sacrifice much of the power advantage that made the engine attractive in the first place. So what did Detroit Diesel do when faced with this impossible choice? Did they try to save their flagship engine, or did they abandon the technology that had made them famous? The answer reveals one of the most dramatic corporate pivots in automotive history and shows how even the mightiest engines can fall when the world changes around them. In 1993, Detroit Diesel made one of the most dramatic decisions in automotive history. They announced that they would discontinue the 8V92 and phase out their entire line of two-stroke truck engines. The company that had built its reputation on the distinctive sound and incredible power of the Detroit two-stroke was walking away from the technology that had made them famous. The decision wasn't made lightly. Detroit Diesel had invested millions of dollars in two-stroke technology and had built their entire corporate identity around it. The 8V92 was still their best-selling engine, and it continued to have a devoted following among owner-operators who valued its power and reliability above all else. But the company's executives could see the future, and it didn't include two-stroke truck engines. Instead, Detroit Diesel announced their intention to focus on four-stroke technology. They would develop a new line of engines that could meet future emissions standards while still providing the power and reliability that customers expected from the Detroit Diesel brand. It was a massive gamble that would require years of development and hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. The announcement sent shockwaves through the trucking industry. Many longtime Detroit Diesel customers felt betrayed. They had remained loyal to the brand through thick and thin, and now they were being told that the engines they loved would no longer be available. Some owner-operators rushed to buy new 8V92 powered trucks before production ended, hoping to extend the life of their favorite engine for a few more years. The transition wasn't smooth. Detroit Diesel's first four-stroke engines had teething problems, and some customers who had switched to the new technology found themselves longing for the reliability of the old two-stroke engines. The company's market share dropped as customers defected to competitors who had been developing four-stroke engines for years. But Detroit Diesel persisted. They knew that the future of the trucking industry lay with cleaner, more efficient engines, and they were determined to be part of that future. The 8V92 had served them well, but it was time to move on. The last Detroit 8V92 truck engine rolled off the production line in 1995, ending an era that had defined American trucking for over 2 decades. The engine that had once seemed unstoppable had been stopped not by mechanical failure or poor design, but by the changing world around it. In many ways, the 8V92 story is a perfect metaphor for the American trucking industry itself. It represents a time when bigger was better, when fuel was cheap, and when environmental concerns took a backseat to raw power and performance. The engine embodied the frontier spirit of the trucking industry, bold, powerful, and unapologetically American. The 8V92's influence on trucking culture cannot be overstated. It created a generation of drivers who associated Detroit diesel with power and reliability. The engine's distinctive sound became part of the American automotive lexicon, and its reputation for durability became the stuff of legend. Even today, decades after production ended, the 8V92 maintains a devoted following among truck enthusiasts and collectors. From a technical standpoint, the 8V92 pushed the boundaries of what was possible with two-stroke technology. Its power output was extraordinary for its time, and its modular design influenced engine architecture for years to come. While two-stroke technology may have fallen out of favor in highway applications, the lessons learned from the 8V92 continue to influence engine design in marine and stationary applications. The engine's downfall also provides valuable lessons about the automotive industry. It demonstrates how external factors like regulations and fuel prices can dramatically alter the competitive landscape. It shows that even the most successful products can become obsolete if they can't adapt to changing circumstances. And it illustrates the importance of anticipating future trends rather than simply reacting to current market conditions. Despite being out of production for nearly 3 decades, the Detroit 8V92 continues to fascinate truck enthusiasts, automotive historians, and anyone interested in American industrial history. Classic trucks equipped with 8V92 engines are sought after by collectors, and the engine's distinctive sound still draws crowds at truck shows and vintage events. The engine's enduring appeal lies partly in nostalgia, but it also reflects a genuine appreciation for the engineering achievement it represented. In an era of increasingly complex and computerized engines, the 8V92's mechanical simplicity and raw power seem refreshingly straightforward. It was an engine you could understand, work on, and respect. The 8V92 also represents a time when the American trucking industry was more individualistic and less corporate. It was the engine of choice for owner-operators who valued power and reliability above all else. It powered the trucks that built the modern American economy, hauling everything from coast to coast on the interstate highway system. In many ways, the 8V92 was the perfect engine for its time. It had the power to handle the demands of a growing economy, the reliability to operate in harsh conditions, and the durability to last for decades. Its failure to adapt to changing times doesn't diminish its achievements, it simply makes its story more poignant. The 8V92 was too powerful for its own good, not because it had too much horsepower, but because it was too specialized, too optimized for a world that changed faster than it could. It was a victim of its own success, trapped by the very characteristics that made it great. So here's a question for you. In today's world of hybrid engines, electric vehicles, and artificial intelligence, are we losing something essential about the automotive experience? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into automotive history, make sure to subscribe for more stories about the engines, innovations, and characters that shape the world we drive in today.